There have been controversial storylines in WWE history, but very few cross the line between entertainment and emotional discomfort the way the custody of Dominik storyline did in 2005. During an era known for shocking television and ruthless storytelling, WWE decided to turn a real child into the center of one of the strangest feuds the company had ever created. What began as a rivalry between two legendary best friends slowly transformed into a deeply personal and bizarre storyline where Eddie Guerrero claimed he was the real father of young Dominik Mysterio, forcing Rey Mysterio into an emotional battle both inside and outside the ring. The result was a storyline that fans still debate decades later, some calling it unforgettable television, while others consider it one of the worst and most uncomfortable angles WWE has ever produced. At the start of 2005, Rey Mysterio and Eddie Guerrero were one of the most beloved duos in WWE. Their chemistry was incredible because they shared years of history dating back to WCW, where both men revolutionized cruiserweight wrestling together. Fans respected them not only for their athletic brilliance, but also for their genuine friendship outside the ring. When they teamed together in WWE and won the tag team championships, audiences loved watching two legendary luchadors finally standing side by side. But behind WWE's creative plans, the company was preparing to destroy that friendship on television in the most shocking way possible. The storyline changed completely when Eddie Guerrero suddenly turned against Rey Mysterio after growing jealous and emotionally unstable. Instead of creating a normal wrestling rivalry based on championships or betrayal, WWE decided to make things deeply personal. Eddie revealed a supposed secret involving Rey's real-life son, Dominik, claiming that years earlier, Dominik had actually been Eddie's biological child before Rey adopted and raised him. The moment stunned audiences because WWE was now using a real child and real family relationships as the emotional core of a wrestling storyline. For some viewers, it felt dramatic and unpredictable. For others, it immediately felt uncomfortable and unnecessary. What made the storyline even stranger was the intensity with which WWE presented it. Eddie Guerrero fully committed to the role, delivering emotional promos where he claimed Rey had stolen his son from him years ago. He manipulated Dominik emotionally on television, gave him gifts, and constantly tried to convince the audience that he was the child's real father. Meanwhile, Rey Mysterio played the desperate parent trying to protect his family from Eddie's obsession. WWE transformed one of wrestling's greatest friendships into a disturbing family drama filled with screaming arguments, emotional confrontations. The storyline became increasingly uncomfortable because Dominik himself was only a child during all of this. Week after week, millions of viewers watched a young boy standing helplessly in the middle of emotional chaos created entirely for entertainment. WWE cameras constantly focused on Dominik's reactions while Eddie and Rey screamed at each other over his custody. At times, the storyline felt less like professional wrestling and more like a televised family court battle. Many fans later admitted they felt genuinely uncomfortable watching such a young child placed at the center of such an emotionally intense storyline. Eventually, WWE took the storyline to an even more unbelievable level by announcing that Rey, Mysterio and Eddie Guerrero would compete in a ladder match at SummerSlam 2005 for the custody of Dominik himself. Instead of fighting for a championship belt, the two wrestlers would climb a ladder to retrieve custody papers hanging above the ring. The concept instantly became one of the most bizarre stipulations in wrestling history because WWE had essentially turned legal guardianship into a wrestling prize. Even by the outrageous standards of Ruthless Aggression Era storytelling, many fans could not believe this storyline had become reality. Despite the ridiculous concept, the actual match itself was incredible because both Eddie and Rey were world-class. Performers capable of turning almost anything into compelling entertainment. The ladder match featured brutal spots, emotional storytelling, and incredible athleticism that reminded fans why both men were considered legends. But no matter how good the wrestling became, the storyline itself still carried an uncomfortable atmosphere because the entire emotional foundation revolved around a child being treated like an object to win. That contradiction made the feud both memorable and deeply strange at the same time. One of the most surreal moments came when young Dominik himself became physically involved in the match. Cameras showed him standing ringside watching two men destroy each other while fighting over his future. At one point, Eddie Guerrero confronted Dominik directly near the ladder, creating an emotionally bizarre moment where the line between wrestling drama and uncomfortable reality almost completely disappeared. Dominik later admitted that as a child, he genuinely wondered what would happen if Eddie actually won the match, even thinking he might have to leave with him afterward. The ending of the match perfectly represented how chaotic the entire storyline had become. Just as Eddie seemed close to victory, his wife Vickie Guerrero suddenly interfered, pushing the ladder over and helping Rey Mysterio retrieve the custody papers above the ring. The visual of Rey celebrating winning custody of his own son remains one of the strangest moments in WWE history because the company presented it with complete seriousness, despite how absurd the concept truly was. Part of what makes this storyline so controversial even today is the fact that both Eddie Guerrero and Rey Mysterio performed their roles so brilliantly that audiences became emotionally invested despite the ridiculous premise. Eddie especially delivered some of the best character work of his career, transforming from beloved fan favorite into a manipulative and emotionally unstable antagonist obsessed with destroying Rey mentally. His performances were so powerful that many fans remember the emotional intensity more than the absurdity of the storyline itself. That emotional realism made the feud unforgettable even when the actual concept seemed completely insane. Another reason this storyline continues being discussed decades later is because it represented the extreme mentality of WWE's Ruthless Aggression Era. During that time, WWE constantly pushed boundaries to create shocking television capable of grabbing attention in a highly competitive entertainment industry. Storylines involving personal trauma, family betrayal, addiction, and real-life pain became increasingly common because controversy created strong audience reactions. The custody of Dominik storyline perfectly represented that era's obsession with blending reality and fiction in ways that often crossed ethical boundaries for entertainment purposes. Looking back now, many fans believe the storyline would never be approved in modern WWE because today's wrestling audiences and media environment are completely different. Using a real child as the emotional centerpiece of such a manipulative storyline would likely create enormous backlash online instantly. Modern wrestling companies are far more cautious about public perception, family involvement, and emotional sensitivity than WWE was during the mid-2000s. What felt acceptable during the Ruthless Aggression Era now feels deeply uncomfortable to many viewers revisiting the storyline years later. At the same time, some wrestling fans still defend the feud because of the incredible performances from Eddie Guerrero and Rey Mysterio. Many argue that despite the ridiculous concept, both men turned terrible creative material into emotionally compelling television through pure charisma and storytelling ability. The ladder match itself remains highly respected from an in-ring perspective, and the feud created moments fans still remember almost 20 years later. In wrestling history, there are many bad storylines that fans completely forget. But this storyline survived because it was impossible to ignore. The tragedy surrounding the storyline became even heavier after Eddie Guerrero passed away a few months later in late 2005. Suddenly, one of wrestling's strangest feuds became emotionally painful for fans in a completely different way. Over time, the storyline evolved from controversial entertainment into one of the final major chapters of Eddie Guerrero's legendary career. That emotional context changed how many people viewed the feud because it became connected to Eddie's lasting legacy inside professional wrestling. Years later, Dominik Mysterio himself eventually entered WWE as a wrestler, creating one of the strangest long-term continuations of any storyline in company history. Modern WWE has repeatedly referenced the old custody storyline, especially as Dominik developed a rebellious heel character heavily inspired by Eddie Guerrero's mannerisms and personality. Some fans even joke that Eddie won custody spiritually because Dominik's modern character resembles Eddie far more than Rey. What once seemed like a bizarre, forgotten storyline somehow became part of WWE's ongoing generational storytelling. Even today, the custody of Dominik storyline remains one of the clearest examples of WWE's willingness to sacrifice realism, comfort, and logic purely for emotional reactions. It was dramatic, bizarre, uncomfortable, emotional, ridiculous, entertaining, and controversial all at the same time. Some fans still view it as brilliant, chaotic wrestling television. Others believe it crossed lines that never should have been crossed in the first place. But regardless of opinion, one thing remains undeniable. The feud between Eddie Guerrero and Rey Mysterio for custody of Dominik became one of the most unforgettable and surreal storylines professional wrestling has ever seen.